Hello and welcome to this repair tutorial, and today we're going to look at a Rotel, and the model number is RB-991, and this will be categorized as a power amplifier. In terms of general specifications, continuous power output is 2 times 200 watts into 8 ohm speakers. Frequency response is 15 Hz to 100 kHz. Total harmonic distortion is 0.03%. And then in terms of dimensions, width is 440 by a height of 121 with a depth of 396 millimeters. Input sensitivity is 1.5 volts into 32 kiloohms, and the weight of the amplifier is 15.5 kilograms. And then here with the top cover removed, really just to talk you through what you're seeing here. So if we work from the left hand side across to the right, the first thing that you're looking at is the right hand channel audio module. And then you can also see towards the front, we have the large toroidal transformer bolted to the chassis. On the right hand side, the other channel. And then you can also see common connection plate. And beneath there are 4 large electrolytic power supply smoothing capacitors. And the rating of those capacitors is 15,000 microfarad at an operational voltage of 80 volts. And then here when you look from the back of the amplifier, you can see the balanced and unbalanced connections for each of the channels, the speaker terminals. You can also see the mains input protection fuse, the input power socket, which is 2-pin, so there's not an additional ground connection. And there is also a slide switch, which you have access to, where you can select between balanced or unbalanced inputs. And then here, if we take a look at the wiring diagram, you can see the large electrolytic capacitors, you can see the bridge rectifiers either side of those, and then the interconnecting cables which connect then to each of the audio modules. So if you needed to disassemble the amplifier, you can refer back to this. But what I would say is if you're working on equipment for the first time, it's always best just to take a series of pictures and then you can always refer back to them. And then here, if we look from the top, you can see the electrolytic smoothing capacitors here. Now, because this amplifier has been in operation for a number of years, i.e. decades, part of the work here was to replace these large capacitors and also do an ESR check on all of the other capacitors, and then also inspect each circuit board for dry solder joints and reflow any that were required. Here I found with the electrolytic smoothing capacitors, they've probably been reduced by about 20-25% overall. So what do we replace them with? Well, we replace them with, again, 15,000 microfarad, but the operating voltage is 100 volts. The reason for that is if you drop down for these capacitors, which are Cornell type, down to 80 volts, the diameter was too small. So we just had to increase the voltage, which gave us the correct diameter. So we didn't need to re-drill the chassis. But the overall height was slightly reduced by about 12 millimeters, but that's not a concern because it's very easy then just to drill out wider holes on this common plate and then bolt through to the capacitors. And then I also had to change the eyelets for the other connections here because the original capacitors had smaller terminals. So the electrolytics were all replaced. And as I said, we also did all of the measurements just to verify that no other capacitors required to be changed, and none of them did. And we also cleaned out all of the dust within the amplifier. And then the only thing that we needed to do then was just to make the bias adjustment, see here for the 2 channels, so that you read 7 millivolts across the test points. So if we take a look here at the extract then from the service manual, you can see that this is the left channel. And what we're interested in doing here is to adjust VR601. And you have the test point here, and we need to make that measurement until we are reading exactly 7 millivolts. You can also see as well, and maybe you saw it on one of the earlier photographs for one of the input channels, you can also see the input stage of this amplifier. There is no separate adjustment for DC offset correction. If you did have an issue with it, then it would be the earlier stage here with what we term as the long tail pairs. But on this amplifier design, what they do is they will back to back the small signal transistors, measured at factory for equivalent gain, and then they then coat them then with a heatsink compound and then just put a rubberized cover over the top just to keep them at the same thermal temperature. So if you did have an offset, then there's no point in making the measurement to try and find out which transistor has drifted. Just do a block change, use your transistor tester to match the gain, and then just replace them, and then you'll find that any offset has then been eliminated. And then here you can see that we're making the initial measurement. And because the electrolytics have been replaced on the power supply, that's not unusual. So you can see here that it was slightly low at 5.14 millivolts. So straightforward enough just to make the adjustment back up to 7 millivolts for each one of the channels. And because this is a power amplifier, we just left it to warm up for approximately 30 minutes. So here are the original smoothing capacitors. And what you can see just at the bottom there is a date code. And it says 9835. So what that means, these capacitors were manufactured in 1998 and week 35 of that year. So they've been in operation for a very, very long time. Hence the reason then to replace them. And then here, if we just look from the top, you can see all of the work has then been carried out. Brand new electrolytic smoothing capacitors, thorough clean, full adjustment, and all solder joints checked. Any that were deemed maybe to be dry were resoldered. So once all that work was done, the only thing that remained then was just to put the amplifier on test. And it ran for approximately 4 hours, completely fault-free, and the amplifier delivers really a really warm quality sound. So that brings us really to the end of this repair tutorial, and if you require any help, guidance or assistance, by all means email audioamplifierservicing@aol.com and I'll be more than happy to come back to you and provide any support that you may require. So until the next time, I wish you all the very best. Cheers and bye-bye.